talked about the context already. Methodism was late. It was late to the social gospel movement. Walter Rauschenbusch, the great Baptist pastor and theologian who worked in Hell's Kitchen, really set the standard for the congregation's response and a thoroughgoing socialist critique from a Christian perspective of Hell's Kitchen and the city. And it was a late arrival for Methodists in the late, almost to the end of the 19th century, before Methodists began to really, on an institutional level, shift from private pietism and conversion to an equal or even perhaps more emphasis on social transformation. It was the accidental work of William Carwadine, Reverend William Carwadine, in Pullman, Chicago, that set the standard. And I'll just highlight these issues here. Carwadine was the pastor of the Pullman Railroad Company Town Methodist Church, whose oppression under the Pullman Railroad construction system had led to indentured servitude for the industrial workers of that town, who had to shop at the company town and store and live in the company houses, and so they got deeper and deeper in debt into the Pullman Railroad town. And the Methodist Church there, William Carwadine, saw with the impending strike that he had to come down on the side of the workers who were feeling more and more oppressed by the Pullman Railroad. Pullman created sleeper cars, which was the great transportation revolution of the late 19th century. You could sleep on the way on a coast-to-coast trip from New York to LA. And so there was oppression. Carwadine preached a series of sermons in the Company Town Church, and it was picked up on the newspapers, and he raised consciousness towards the right of workers to strike. George Pullman created the Pullman car sleeper system. Here's William Carwadine, who found himself drawn into this social gospel fight against his will. In his own words, he said for many years he had focused on the preaching of the gospel and the transformation of the individual, but found himself accidentally on the side of those who had been wronged, and simply wanted to see God's kingdom in Pullman, Illinois, against the backdrop of the oppression. And so he becomes our first patron saint of the social gospel, I should say, and then spoke all over America with 60 or more lectures in America. The labor is worthy of his hire was his great text, and that is a scriptural text. He saw that there were different laws for the rich and the poor, and he saw that there was no freedom or liberty for Western civilization and Christianity with that double as well. Carwadine, the accidental social gospel preacher, through his consciousness towards workers' rights, really led the first phase of the social gospel. Workers' rights was really Methodism's first, in America, its first great social justice prophetic work. Methodism had always been strongly on the side of the worker in Britain. In fact, the worker had always been the heart of Methodism, the lower middle class artisan. But by the late 19th century in America, the fact that Methodism found itself beginning to work more towards the oppressed lower classes, really was a missional moment, a turning moment for Methodism, and it gave rise to more articulate leaders on a national scale like Frank Mason North to begin to think about the possibility that Christianity and socialism, a new social order, and a more collective ability to affect change could come about. And the U.S. Strike Commission was formed, and Methodism, through Frank Mason North and others, tended to invoke the second great commandment: to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Second great commandment, love of neighbor, was certainly a part of Frank Mason North's constructive confidence that socialism could be Christianized, or that Christianity needed to be socialized. And so many of Carwardine's arguments filtered into Frank Mason North. Also, the more cutting-edge socialist agenda of Harry F. Ward sharpened the lines for Methodism to understand its social place in transforming society away from the dominance of the rich towards a more equitable distribution. Harry F. Ward, who in this biography is painted as in the trenches, which is a World War I metaphor with both Jesus and Marx kind of bringing them together or fighting against. It's kind of a double ambiguity. He was born in England. That certainly focused his theological agenda more towards the working class, because the working class was really where, and the poor was where Wesley's Methodism really had its great center of gravity. But he came to Northwestern University and graduated in 1897, which is a Methodist college, and had worked in Chicago slums for 13 years, from 1900 to 1913. And he co-founded the Methodist Federation for Social Service in 1907. And writing the Social Creed, it was adopted by the Methodist Episcopal Church and its Federal Council of Churches in 1908. He was the radical think tank of bringing Frank Mason North's ideas that Christianity could be socialized and socialism could be Christianized. And so he was the cutting-edge thinker that created the Social Creed. He went on to become professor of Christian ethics at Boston University from 1913 to 1917. But really, his work was creating the Methodist Federation for Social Service, the great first caucus that had dominated the first half of the 20th century at general conferences. So with the Methodist Federation for Social Service, which continues today as the MFSA, Methodist Federation for Social Action, the plumb line as its justice symbol, Harry F. Ward and Frank Mason North teamed up in 1907 to really codify and create a Wesleyan notion of social transformation, social action, building a bridge from Wesleyan piety, in particular a socialist vision, a collectivist vision based on British Methodist notions from Harry F. Ward, to transform the robber baron nation of pre-World War I America, the Gilded Age of the late 19th century. So Harry F. Ward brought the critical edge. Frank Mason North codified it and wrote it and articulated it in ways that were more palatable to the Northern Church, the MEC, and the first Social Creed was born out of their work. in 1908, the first social creed, which is really based on workers' rights and women's rights to not be denigrated and oppressed through the industrial system. So the social creed of 1908 becomes the precursor to the social principles. And so both the Northern and Southern Church in the post-World War I era saw the ever-increasing plight of the urban poor and the slipping middle class of Methodism. And so the social principles grow out of the work of Harry F. Ward and Frank Mason North. It brought traction, and by 1908, the Federal Council of Churches are formed that basically go with the Methodist notion of workers' rights embedded in a vision of a socialist Christianity. And the Federal Council of Churches of 1908 adopt the social creed for workers' rights, and this becomes the baseline of the National Council of Churches. The FCC becomes the National Council of Churches. But this optimism of Christian socialism and that the kingdom of God could be generated through social action was really broken by the fact that the Christian West went to war with each other, both European and North American. Here is a compilation of the Social Creed of 1908 from the Federal Council of Churches, which grew out of Harry F. Ward's vision and Frank Mason North's editorial translation. It's for equal rights and complete justice for all men. Of course, they were not gender inclusive at the time. In all stations of life, rights to self-maintenance, rights against encroachment against their rights, industrial oppression rights, conciliation, arbitration, which is the precursor to modern notions of protection against collective bargaining rights and unions, abolition of child labor, the sweatshop system for women, and something I think we could all agree upon, the gradual and reasonable reduction of the hours of labor to the lowest practicable point, and for leisure, which is the condition of highest human life, and for at least a one-day weekend. So minimum wage. Methodism was at the heart of this proposal, and although we still are working for the abatement of poverty and provision of old age, we can all agree that these are minimum rights today, even as we have encroaching entitlements throughout North American political systems and the polarization that comes from that. But most of these seem to be protections of basic Christian rights, if not political rights. Frank Mason North, through his work originally in New York City as an urban minister, training at the highest level of Wesleyan humanistic principles at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, had worked all across the New York Conference. He became first, from 1887 to 1912, the leader and corresponding secretary of the Church Extension and Missionary Society of New York City, created urban clubs, community centers for life skills. He was elected from 1912 for 12 years to 1924. He led the Methodist Episcopal Church North Board of Foreign Missions, all while creating, at least for the Northern Church, a concept of urban ministry and justice that led to the vision of the social creed and today's social principles, as well as the National Council of Churches. His ideas were also spread with the early first half of the 20th century Northern Church's missionary spread through his leadership of the Board of Foreign Missions. He was also a hymn writer who wrote the great hymn, "We're Cross the Crowded Ways of Life," which is a classic of the Northern Methodist jurisdictions, but is often overlooked in the South.